how do we know what we've lost if we've never truly experienced it? Learning to adapt to these technologies is something humans have always done. But my question in the book is, should we always adapt to our use of these technologies? Because are we losing something in the process?
Hey, everybody out there. Welcome to today's episode of Love, Loss, and Hallucinations. Really glad you could join us for this one. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. My guest today is Christine Rosen, and she is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for Commentary Magazine, a senior editor at the New Atlantic, and a fellow at the University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. She lives in Washington, D.C. She thinks and writes a lot about American history, society, culture, technology, and human behavior. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. And you said it was freezing out there in Washington. Apologies.
Yeah.
So I guess we're inside and it's warm and we'll have a lovely conversation instead.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And I want to start out this just with a little intro here in that from our differing perspectives, like Christine is a secular conservative, raised as a fundamentalist Christian, whereas I am a more spiritual leaning liberal, former atheist, raised as a Lutheran. And if we really wanted to feed that algorithmic beast, we would just get into our differing views on so many things.
We'd be fighting about the soul for an hour.
Yes, exactly. But that's not really what this podcast is about. So sorry if anyone out there is disappointed. We're here more to find common ground and connection that, we all have as human beings, despite differing philosophies in other areas. So I'm excited about this conversation. The reason that we know each other is we met somewhat recently at the Jackson Hole Book Festival. And Christine was telling me about her book, The Extinction of Experience. Here, for those that you can't see it, I am holding it up right now. But she... And I guess, obviously this fits into the theme of the podcast, mostly around loss, and not quite the loss we normally talk about here, which is like death and loss of self and that sort of thing. But, well, I guess it does lend itself to loss of self. So I guess first, why don't you just introduce yourself, anything I missed, and what inspired you to write this book? A question I'm sure you've never been asked.
Well, first of all, Scott's being nice, introducing me as having said we met and talked about my book, because actually what I was doing is following around one of his amazing dogs and trying to get it to like me and pet it, and just an incredible animal. And so you're very kind, but it's lovely. You both have these lovely dogs, and I was happy to meet them. And I think it's interesting when, I've listened to your podcast and talking about loss and actually all those rituals of loss and connection throughout human life. I think that is what my book tries to get at least part of the story. And I was inspired. I should say I completely stole the title from a wonderful naturalist. I give him plenty of credit in the book, named Robert Michael Pyle. He was worried decades ago about the fact that each new generation was not spending enough time in the wilderness, in the outdoors, in nature, seeing our ecosystems in actions, finding plant and animal species that they'd never encountered before. And his concern was that if you have each successive generation not having those experiences, those hands-on experiences, they won't care if something goes extinct or if an ecosystem disappears, because they don't have any real connection to it in the first place. And after I read that essay long, long time ago, but it really stuck with me, this idea of how do we know what we've lost if we've never truly experienced it? And that is what got me thinking about some of the ways we mediate our human experiences now, because we can. We didn't used to be able to do that. Scott and I also bonded over the fact that we're both Gen X, and we're this hybrid generation of weirdos, small weird generation that we didn't grow up with a lot of technology. We had some, but it was very specific. It was TV with a few channels and maybe
Atari is not
Atari,
like what's going on today.
But it was very limited, and you couldn't carry it around in your pocket. So learning to adapt to these technologies is something humans have always done. But my question in the book is, should we always adapt to our use of these technologies? Because are we losing something in the process?
Mhm. Well, and I just wanna speak to what you started with about as far as the, losing connection with nature, because, there was a recent study by Miles Richardson,
Hmm.
who's a professor of nature connectedness at the University of Derby, who found that from the 1800s to 2020, there's been a 60% decline in, people's connection to nature due to urbanization, understandably, loss of wildlife, environmental degradation, and in the lack of intergenerational transmission, which I think is uh, something you're talking about in all of this. And they actually use your phrase "extinction of experience" in this piece, your title, I guess. And what I mean, I believe you have kids, correct?
Yes, I have two boys who are now 19, so they're technically
Mm.
adults, but they're kids.
Yeah, I thought I was an adult at 19, and I was not.
Not till 25 when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed.
Yeah,
Are you actually an
yeah,
adult?
and even then, I'm not sure, at least
Yeah,
not for
that's
me,
questionable.
but and I mean, was that also part of what inspired you to write the book, like your sons and the experiences they're having and what you're seeing them not getting to experience?
Yes, it was interesting watching them, particularly in the educational context, the things that they weren't learning. I ended up, one of the chapters in the book does a deep dive into the disappearance of handwriting, which
Mm.
is not something I thought I would be concerned about. But I'm one of those, I think I'm an optimist by nature, hopeful by nature, but very skeptical of new things. So that puts me in
Mm.
this weird position when one of my sons came home and said, "Well, we're finished learning cursive." I'm like, "That was like a week that you spent on cursive handwriting." They're like, "Well, now we go on to keyboarding." And I thought, "Oh, sure. I mean, that makes sense.
That makes
Everybody uses
sense.
computers." But then I said, "But does it make sense?" And I started, this is that part of my brain that then goes, "Well, let me explore that." And I started looking into research about handwriting. And it turns out that there are all these connections between learning to write in cursive. You first learn block letters in print, and then you move on to
Mhm.
cursive, that are linked to things like memory formation and retention, future literacy, the ability to kind of analyze more difficult text. So it's not just being able to sign your name and read grandma's, letter from long ago. It's actually linked to how our minds and our bodies work together. And that mind body connection really stuck with me, that here was something that, just like everyone, I thought, sure, this is obsolete. We don't need this anymore. But we set it aside without really making sure that there weren't other benefits to learning this skill. And for kids in particular, so I have boys, they're twins, one's right handed, one's left handed. I'm left handed. Learning to write by hand is really difficult if you're left handed. And
Mhm.
there was also something for them where it forced them to slow down. They had to sit still and slow down and really figure out how to have their hand do what their brain was telling it to do. And those are important skills that I think we set aside too quickly. And so I do go into a bit about handwriting. And I think a lot of watching them navigate a world where everything was so easy and convenient if they had a smartphone in their hands, which
Mhm.
mine didn't until high school. I was tough about that. But the expectations it formed in them, like how it was more difficult for them to practice patience in other aspects of life because they assumed, well, I can order tacos, they'll be here in 10 minutes, but in the rest of the world, I have to wait for 30 minutes in a line. You're like, yes, that's part of
God
being human.
God
So I
forbid,
think,
even though I'll be on my phone in that line now and
well, exactly, but even still, it was one of those things where I thought this is really changing our behavior and our expectations about each other and about, I was really concerned about the formations of friendships, how
Mm.
transactional it had all become on social media for a younger generation, and how frustrating it was for them to be told that these tools would help them connect with more and more people, but they didn't feel truly connected. They
Right.
didn't have as many people they could rely on in an emergency. And so those contradictions have just over time really accumulated, and I think a lot of people are talking about that now, especially in terms of social media.
Yeah, definitely, and as you were saying, like, certainly it's allowed us to, like, connect or reconnect with like, I've reconnected with people from high school, from social media, and that sort of thing. Obviously, there's an irony here in that we're doing this over Zoom, and technology is allowing us to do this,
Mhm.
but yet, if I remember correctly, you also wrote, even over the Zoom and this sort of, like, chest up interaction with each other also has an effect on, like, sort of different things that we're losing if you can get into that.
Yeah, so the chapter I had the most fun writing, and it's probably still like 30 pages too long, so I'm warning you if you read the book. You can skim this one, but there's a kernel in here that is important, and that's that the decline of face-to-face, in-person communication. And it's not just a matter of being able to read someone's face, which we know from all kinds of research uh, leads to greater trust. You're less likely to lie. You're more likely to lie if you can't see the person's face at all. But even
Mhm.
on a screen, there's more ability to sort of mask one's real feelings, or there's more incentive to be untruthful. Face to face, it's harder to get away with that, and it's because it's not just our facial expressions; it's our tone of voice. It's the way. I mean, I'm a talker with my hands, like an Italian grandma. But we use gestures, and we intuitively understand these. If we grew up in a world where we were as young children watching the faces and behavior of those around us. So if you scowled at me and crossed your arms, I might think if I can instantly probably tell if you're angry or if you're just lost in thought or perplexed about something. And those
Mhm.
are things we know without knowing why we know them. But we cannot take for granted that each new generation is learning those things because they aren't spending anywhere near as much time with each other, with their peer groups, or with other people face to face. So we learn these behaviors. So the face to face interactions turn out to be a central part of what helps each of us understand unspoken rules of how to behave, but also how to understand ourselves in relation to each other. Because talking over a screen or texting or posting stuff on social media that's heavily filtered and very misleading,
Mhm.
you get a different development of a formation of self. I think you're very much dependent on what others think of you. I think it becomes confusing and anxiety inducing to do something unusual or maybe something your peer group might not approve of. Taking so you become a little weirdly more risk averse. Even as we're consuming the content of people taking wild risks for popularity. So there are again these contradictions, but at core, what it means to be a person, an embodied human being, means we need to be around other people, and we need to do that face to face because while the connections you can make thanks to technology are wonderful, and I agree, I keep in touch with people all over the world because of technology. We still need to spend a huge amount of our time with each other in bounded physical space, in embodied space.
Absolutely, and there is just a different I mean, whether you wanna call it energy or presence or, um, even just noticing the way someone's doing something with their hand that, you wouldn't see on screen,
Mhm,
and having that person to person connection just allows it to be deeper
mhm,
and for us to have more empathy for those people.
mhm.
It's much harder, I think, to, sorta have anger or, uh, really go after someone when you're in person versus
Mhm.
I mean, not a lot of people do it, but
Well,
but
this is the emotional. I'm glad you brought up emotions like anger,
Mhm,
because one of the things we're finding in a lot of the behavioral science research about younger generations who've spent a lot of time mediating their own environments through screens is that not only can they not properly identify someone else's emotional state, but they can't
mm,
even always identify their own. Because what they're used to doing when they're fearful or angry or anxious is distracting themselves from themselves by picking up the
right.
phone and doing something else. And I think I have a weird hobby in martial arts where a lot of what we train in is awareness. And it was really difficult for me when I first started doing this more than a decade ago, first as a student and now I'm an instructor, to remind people that, without a distraction, it can be incredibly intense to be aware of the person right in
Mhm.
front of you you're training with or the people nearby. And it's a huge act of human will to pay attention, but is also the most important form of respect and acknowledgement we can give each other is our undivided attention. And we live in a world where we're promised everything at our fingertips, but what are we sacrificing? That form of undivided attention where we can see each other's emotions and understand our own.
Yeah, I know there was a quote in the book somewhere, I can't remember who it was by, but saying that, giving someone your undivided attention is basically the
Hannah
greatest
Arendt, yes.
gift.
Yes,
Yes.
Hannah Arendt, yeah. The
Yeah.
wonderful observation. It's so true.
Mhm,
It's so true.
mhm. Yeah, and I also, obviously people have read about this and we can get into it a little bit, but this lack of in-person connection, especially with I mean, even our generation and above, but particularly younger people is, depression's increasing. anxiety's increasing, suicide's increasing.
Mhm,
And, it was already, I feel, difficult for people to kind of be aware, as you said, of what they're feeling and what's going on and what someone else might be feeling
mhm.
um, before technology. And we've just made it extra difficult.
Yeah, there was a report a few years ago from the Surgeon General about the loneliness crisis.
Hmm.
And I was pleased to see attention brought to that, and particularly after the pandemic, where a lot of people were, doing most of their interacting through the screen out of necessity. There we didn't see a return to pre-pandemic levels of in-person interaction, which worried me a lot. But the part of the report that I think he missed was that um, was focus it's correct to focus on loneliness, but what people were doing was actually choosing self-isolation. And
Hmm.
that then made them lonely long term, but at the moment, they were thinking, "That's too much trouble to go out. I'll just, game with my I'll be talking to my friends while I game, or I can text my friend." So it's this substitution of that thing that's inconvenient. Because look, you gotta put on pants and brush your hair and go out into the world and deal with people, but at the end of the day, almost always, including when they research people's happiness levels and satisfaction levels, they're grumbly about going out, but when they come back, they report saying, "I'm so glad I did that." And that's almost always the case, unless it's
Hmm.
like the forced jollity of a work party or something. But I think we're accepting as a reasonable substitution these mediated interactions, and then wondering why, if we have so much of those, we still feel kind of empty or lonely or unhappy or anxious. And that's where I think we have to really ask questions about our own choices and our own behavior, because we're accepting the easier substitute, but long term, it's making us less happy and less likely to flourish.
Exactly. It's the easy go to. It's like, oh, this seems fine in the moment, but those
Hmm.
little non-human to human in-person interactions add up over time. Um, just go in a little bit about what do you mean by mediated interactions?
So this was tough. I had to the 2 questions I had to answer, for wonderful friends of mine who were reading the work in progress while I was writing the book were, "So define experience." I'm like, "I'm not a philosopher." That was my excuse. It was mainly that it's actually very difficult, but I did come to, and what does it mean to mediate something? So what I came down to, and what I really talk about in the book, is, an experience I consider an authentic human experience to be one that's physically bounded. You're in your own body without any sort of screen between you and another person, and you are sharing the same physical space. So that's a pretty basic thing, and that used to be the standard, the norm, because we didn't have the alternative. So now that we have the alternative, we have to choose that human in-person interaction, and we're not doing that enough. But when it comes to mediation, I think that's, look, you put on a pair of glasses, that's a mediating technology. You can see things clearer. A lot of these tools are just that. They're effective extensions of senses we already have. Our use of these tools, when they really start to shape our desires and shape the forms our relationships take, so that we're far more transactional and we feel more in control of what we have to listen to or put up with from another person. That's where I think they are still tools, but they're extending aspects of human nature that maybe we shouldn't want to encourage. So,
Hmm.
we do have these old concepts of virtue and self-discipline and all these rules. These tools kind of give us a free pass from those in a lot of ways. And convenience, efficiency, or Mark Zuckerberg's like seamlessness, that's great when you're trying to, get through a store and get the stuff you need on your list so you can go home and be with your family. It's not especially useful when you're trying to find a long-term life partner or
Hmm.
a really good friend. Those things are awkward, inconvenient. They carry huge risk because you might be rejected, and they require a gradual unfolding over time. And I think that's what we forget, because now we have the choice to be efficient in our relationships and mediate our relationships. But that's why I think the authentic in-person experience is really should we should hold that up as the gold standard. We can't always do that way, but if we
Hmm.
can, we really should try to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it takes definitely a certain amount of courage, I think, no matter what your age is, to ask somebody out or to, in face rejection, which nobody likes, but yet, as you said, it's building character, it's building resilience.
Mhm.
And these technologies are allowing us to kind of bypass that easily. Um,
Mhm. There's I would also add, I have a story in the book, and people who've read the book have then written me many times over their own versions of the story. So it turns out it's pretty common that I talked to a lot of these are generally younger people, but not always, who, met online either, via social media or, they saw each other online and they were having some sort of maybe it's even on a dating app and, chatting and texting, and so they feel a kind of, connection at this initial level. And, enough time passes and they meet in person, and one of 2 things happens. Either
Mm.
unfortunately, for a lot of them, there was 0 connection physically. Even though they knew what they looked like, they'd even sometimes done video chat, but that's the thing, that's this weird, inexplicable, qualitative thing that it's called chemistry, spark, whatever you wanna call it, this old-fashioned thing, but they
Yeah.
didn't have it, and it would shock them sometimes. They're like, "But we clicked on so many levels," and yet that's human nature going, "Nope, maybe try someone else."
Maybe not. There's that
And they'd
in-person
invested,
energy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that those sorts of experiences are now much more common, and I think they can be that form of rejection is even worse because you've invested time and energy in cultivating a kind of relationship at that level, and then you
Mhm.
meet and it's just like, eh.
Yeah.
Big disappointment for people.
Yes, yes. And well, and it's to the point where, as you write in your book, there's people even like marrying cyber creation.
Yes.
I don't know what you would call them. I'm missing the name. It's escaping me at the moment. But either having relationships or actually marrying this creation that's just online,
Mhm.
and reporting that it's more satisfying. But in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, because you don't have to deal with any of the like troubles of
Legal stuff.
life and like conflict and like the hard conversations.
Right. Which of course are, there's some worrisome developments in that arena, particularly for younger generations because of
Hmm.
the rise of I turned this book in, well over a year ago, right as the AI stuff was starting to become much bigger, and certainly before a lot of the commercial applications of AI fueled chatbots and friend bots and these sorts of things, which are now, character AI replica. There's all these companies that are giving people what I call synthetic friendships, synthetic
Hmm.
relationships. And there's the early survey data we have is people saying exactly what you're pointing out as a worrisome trend. They're holding up as a positive because they say sometimes it's just so much easier than dealing with a human, but I still get that emotional connection to someone. In part because they're just feeding you what you want to hear. That's how they're
Hmm.
designed and encouraging you to keep talking. But you can well see a future world where because we haven't been out there practicing those difficult interpersonal skills, of course
Hmm.
it's easier to have a chatbot that's your girlfriend or boyfriend telling you, "Oh, you're amazing. Oh, no, you shouldn't have to take that from your boss." And then when you're tired of you never have to give anything back. You can only talk about yourself. It's entirely a sycophantic relationship, and you
Yeah.
can just turn it off when you're done, and no human relationship would survive under those circumstances at all.
No, and eventually, I would imagine, since I haven't had one myself, but I would imagine it's going to leave you feeling hollow.
Yes.
And it's, even like yesterday, I was having like a deep, harder than usual conversation with my wife, but because we were able to like be vulnerable with each other and have that deeper connection, like we were both kind of teary eyed having gotten through this. And I just don't see that happening with a synthetic relationship.
Well, right, because you have mutual trust, and what an
Mm,
AI chatbot offers is a one-way form where you trust what you're being told, and you make a human connection to an inhuman thing. There is no trust that can come back to you in that direction at all.
right.
And it's trust that allows for that sort of difficult vulnerability and for that sort of risk taking. It's risky to tell another human being your deepest, darkest thoughts or secrets, but people are now doing, and it feels unsafe even though it's actually what we're meant to do. So I think
Mhm,
people choose this thinking it's risk-free and safer to tell this to a machine.
mhm.
And the very first chatbot designed by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT, in the 20th century named Eliza, he instantly saw how people bonded and treated this thing like a human, and his instant response was, "Oh, there is a great danger here. There's a
Wow.
great danger in this," and he was correct.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and it also you mentioned this book in your book, which would and I think it's a little later in it, but Ready Player One
Mhm.
by Ernest Cline. And, when I read that in probably before COVID for sure, maybe 2015 or something like that, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of fun." And obviously, I'm sure as you did, enjoyed all the Gen X references.
Yes.
But but, I was like, "Oh, this is kind of fun." It's sort of in there. I can sort of see a couple things sort of like that in today's world, but I never thought like it could ever come to pass. But now you're like, "Oh yeah, this is real." Like that world is right there and headed that direction if we allow it.
And it is the vision. It's heralded as a positive almost utopian vision of how society could be by the people who obviously manufacture, control, and profit from the VR device you're gonna slap on your face all day.
Yeah.
And it's also being talked about as a way of dealing with what might likely be widespread unemployment created by, widespread adoption of AI technologies and the like.
Mhm.
And all of that, whenever there's a really disruptive technology, it's useful to kind of spin out all these different theories and think about how our current system will have to evolve and all this. But what worries me about those conversations is that it's also a really starkly divided class line. And it's not necessarily only about wealth, it's about the people who can protect themselves from all of those disruptions and want to separate themselves apart from
Mm.
everyone else. And they understand that the everyone else will get very restive and potentially violent. They have read some history. So the VR is the way to kind of I see it as a way to pacify people who might otherwise be frustrated with how the world is structured and might want to change it, maybe even through revolutionary means. So there's a weird tension there in terms of like, trust us, this is good for you. And for me, as someone who obviously believes that kind of synthetic experience can never be deeply humane for anyone who feels they don't have any other choice. We have the human response is to say, okay, if the world's not working for a lot of people, we got to change how the world works. We don't just,
Mhm.
try to pacify the people living in it.
Right, and I think that speaks to what a big chapter. I don't know if it's a big chapter, but, um, you know, as far as pacifying people who have, say, lost their job because of AI, and then they're bored, and then they're gonna get angry, and all of that is like this which I found this very interesting thing about just the loss of boredom that our phones are allowing us,
Yes.
and why that actually is a loss, and
Mhm.
if you can speak to that.
Yeah,
um
this chapter gets me a lot of grief from people who one of my colleagues, every time he passes me in the hall now, he's like, "Oh, it's not Dr. Boredom." And look, I remember being bored as a kid, we standing in lines, waiting in the I grew up in Florida, broiling in the car while my mom ran into a store to grab something and just being like, "It will never end." Um, but what I think, and this is a challenge I give myself all the time, is it's not just that we're more impatient, and we see this in rates of road rage and air rage and people just losing their
Mhm,
minds anytime they're told no in a line or something. Um, that sort of inability to control one's own frustration. It's also that we're stealing all these little moments throughout a day where we used to have to do nothing and maybe our minds would wander and we'd have a interesting idea or we'd notice
mhm,
something about the people around us or we just have general awareness, interstitial moments, little split second here or there, 5 minutes while you're waiting for your friend to arrive, while you're waiting for the bus. I was always looking at my phone. And so while I was doing this research, I'm like,
mhm.
well, I need to practice what I'm trying to preach here. So I put my phone away and I did this for a week. I tried never to use the phone for interstitial moments. And
Mm,
the first few days were really tough. It was really tough. I didn't realize,
you automatically wanted to reach for
and
it.
I'm not on social media. I am not a heavy phone user by any means. And even it was something to do. It was something to take me out of a moment where I otherwise would have had to just cope with being bored, impatient, uncomfortable, waiting. And waiting is a deeply important life skill to work on. It's why if you have a toddler and they're having a tantrum, they have to like sit on the step and calm down for a few minutes, right? You just like, just stop, just take a breath, like reconnect with your physical body and figure out what this is really about. And that was for me revelatory because even as a not heavy phone user, I was doing it all the time. So
Mhm,
recapturing those moments and allowing your mind either look around or just, meditate for a minute or two, take a deep breath and let your mind wander or have a daydream. Remember daydreaming? People used to daydream. So it's stealing something that's deeply human, and it's a deeply human coping impulse actually to let it's
Mhm.
why when you're in the shower you have great ideas because your mind is free to you're doing something routine and your mind is free to wander. I would love for more people to kind of try that experiment and see if it changes how they feel throughout the day.
Yeah, and even just trying it for one day, um, seems like a great
It's tough.
idea.
It's really
Um
tough. I still make myself do it I mean, because I fall into the bad habit, all the time, so
Yeah, I actually have a friend, here in California who's also an author. Her name's Tiffany Shlain, and she wrote a book,
oh, she's great,
24/6.
yeah, I know her stuff,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that she has like, a technological Sabbath,
Mhm.
where her and her family just take a whole day off every week. They've been doing it for years, and amazing book about how it's just sorta changed their dynamic or deepened it, of course.
Yeah.
Um, but,
She
you
was
know,
a
the
pioneer, by the way. She was a pioneer about a lot of this stuff back when everybody was still like, "The internet is wonderful. It's all puppies and rainbows and, sparkling unicorns." She's like, "Well," she raised really good questions very early on. She should get
Yeah.
a lot more credit than she does for being a really early, she would warn of some of the risks to what it meant to be human.
Yeah. Yeah, she was definitely ahead of the curve. You're absolutely right. So, yeah, this loss of boredom is like, it's where you problem solve and get creative
Mhm,
ideas. And I know, like, say my wife, who's also a writer, she would say her best book ideas have come up when she was daydreaming, and
mhm.
it's certainly not going to come up when she's looking at her phone.
Right. Well,
Um,
that the other thing it steals from us, I think, both in tiny increments and then if we do the doom scrolling at the end of a long day when we're tired in larger chunks of time, is a sense of time. Because how many people have like gone on Instagram Reels and then kind of jolted up, looked up, an hour later, an hour has passed. And I've done this with friends of mine. I've said, name one thing you remember from what you just watched for the past hour.
uh,
Occasionally, they can remember one of the creepier, weird videos they saw, the little snippet, this short form video, but most of it's just already gone, and it freaks them out to realize, "I just spent an hour and a half, and I have very little memory of what I was doing," and I told them, like, it's meant to anesthetize you. It's not just
mhm.
passive like watching TV. It's truly has an anesthetic effect on your brain, and look, in small doses, it's harmless, like, if you have a plane delay and that's the only thing, fine, but most people are doing this throughout their day as habit, as a routine, and
Mhm.
they're not thinking about what that's doing to them, to their ability, as you say, to kind of really think creatively and just let their minds wander.
Yeah, the younger people in our at the record label that my wife and I run with another partner, but, the younger people, the 20 somethings, like, they know, like, they're like, "We're always on our phone, and we know it's terrible, and I feel like shit, and I need to stop, and I can't," and, obviously, there's an addiction element to it, and
Well, then
as
yeah, we
Go
should have
ahead.
sympathy. I was gonna say we should have
Mhm,
so it's interesting to me because there was this whole period of time where everyone would scold those kids and go, "Just be more disciplined." But I've really come around to the idea that it's look, older generations just handed them this stuff without really thinking
mhm,
about it. They were raised with it. They know it's bad for them, but also their entire lives are filtered through those phones. Like all it's not
mhm,
just for fun. It's not just entertainment. It's how they connect with everyone they know. It's how they connect with work. If you're a gig worker, you have to have that phone on you all the time. That's how you make a living. You're constantly being surveyed and monitored by friends, loved ones, and employers. And it is kind of impossible for them to tear themselves away from it unless there
mhm.
is they do need to be lashed to the mast so they don't head towards the siren, and the ones who do it well are the ones who create new infrastructure where so my sons, one of them goes out with his friends and they all are forced, if they're at a restaurant, they have no money, they're in college, so they, like, put their phones in the middle of the table. The first kid who picks up that phone during the conversation at dinner has to pay for everyone else.
Brilliant idea.
So that right? Nobody wants to pick up the tab, they're all broke, so they're like even if it's like at a pizza place, but what it teaches them all is they all are acknowledging, like, it's hard you cannot compete. If you're a human being with
Mhm.
another human being, you can't compete with what is as entertaining as the phone is like a slot machine drawing your attention to it all
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. So if
Yeah.
we know this, we can set it down, and I think I see that among young people that they're creating these new ways of doing that is buy-in for their friends to be able to also say, "Yes, let's put it down for an hour or 2."
Yeah, and even the sort of recent surge of going back to old flip phones where that you don't have all the pictures
And
and
vinyl?
technology.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and vinyl, hey, yeah.
Mhm.
But and you even write in your book that 16 to 22-year-olds, something 53% would rather lose their sense of smell than give up their phone, which is mind-blowing, but I get it, like, they're like, "This is my life."
It's their life, yeah.
Mhm,
And they I talk to a lot I spend a lot of time talking to I teach young people on college campuses, and I go and talk to them a lot, and one of the most, remarkable things they tell me when I ask them about their relationships with their phones and just with technology in general is exactly what you said. It's like, we know we spend too much time on it, and,
mhm,
but they're very skeptical generation, the Zoomers, the Gen Zers. They are very skeptical of authority. So one way I've found to really convince them to be skeptical of their own use is to think about all the information that they're giving away for free about themselves. And a lot of it now is in highly detailed. Some of it, if they wear trackers of any sort for like fitness,
mhm.
a lot of data is being gleaned. And when they get their first job, I always tell them, if they give you that badge, where to get in and out of the building, when HR gives you that badge, ask them to give you a list disclosing what it tracks.
Oh, wow.
And one kid I know did that, and he sent it to me, and he said it was not just getting in and out of the building, it was who he passed in the hall, how often he vocalized in meetings, like, it tracked at a granular level a ton of stuff that he was like,
Wow.
that's what this his reaction was, "Holy cow." But,
Yeah.
he asked and they told him, but so that's where I think they're having an increasing skepticism about maybe some of these big businesses, the big tech companies,
Mhm.
all these things that are telling them one thing, and their experience of the use of these tools is creating another more skeptical, understanding, and that's all good. I think skepticism is good. They should ask questions and really push back, and they have to make their own things. They've gotta create tools and platforms that serve their generation's needs, not just, inherit what's been handed to them.
Right. Absolutely. And, yeah, I think that also speaks to, um, kinda looping in the hallucination aspects of which aren't necessarily in your book, because you said, as you said, the big AI boom sorta came after you'd already turned it in. But I think we definitely need to touch on, like, AI hallucinations,
Mhm.
um, and not trusting AI, period. Like, I who knows if they'll get better about that, but, what we're talking about here is, whether it's AI actually creating resources or creating sources for what they're saying that are
Mhm.
not true.
Mhm.
And, whether it's, this is hit high level, like there was a Trump administration MAHA health report that cited non-existent studies for children's health that was released. And then
Mhm.
it's hit other governments too. Australia had a report that uh, something like a $440,000 report that was also had cited things that didn't exist.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know, where is that at from what you know, and where do you think that will be heading?
So that's definitely a problem that's gonna get worse, and
Mm,
already is, and, I've done a couple of test runs on with different AI programs. I got a PhD in history in a very specific aspect of history of science, and I basically know all the literature in this little tiny, sliver of history of science in this period of time. So I was like, "Well, that's what I can test. I know the scholarly literature." So I asked a few questions and asked it to generate, like, a paper, like, what would be, like, a college term paper, and I instantly picked out the hallucinations. I think there were 3 footnotes that were clearly, there were 3 that were made up. Then there were others
wow.
that were, like, cited the right author, but the wrong book, things that but I instantly knew it. No one who didn't have, years of graduate study in that field would ever have seen it. And I think one of the things from the get-go right now with AI that I find worrisome is that we're even using human words to describe technological errors. So a
Huh.
hallucination is when the AI program has not worked. It is an error, and it should be called an error.
Error.
Hallucination sounds like, "Oh, this is," and look, hallucinations are things humans recognize, many have had. They can be terrifying, but they can also be enlightening for people. It has a vibe, if you will.
It
I'm
does.
aging myself. No, it has a meaning. It has a meaning for humans. We understand it has a history. It has examples grounded in being human. AI folks are purposely taking words that have those kinds of meanings and co-opting them. And they're
Mhm.
some of them are doing it because it's convenient, but many are doing it deliberately to make these tools sound magical in a way that they are not. And they make them
Mhm.
sound magical because what they don't want to acknowledge in many cases is that they don't understand what they've created and how it works. So they don't know how to reverse engineer a lot of this stuff. Tell them to, it's different than algorithms. I mean, these models work in different, more sophisticated ways. And I've done, know a lot of people in the industry. I have a lot of respect for a lot of the work that people in AI are doing. But this issue of how to teach humans whether or not we can trust these models or trust what is being told to us, I think we need very clearly defined terms. So I
Mm.
refuse to call them hallucinations when they come up in discussions I'm having. I said, "Oh, you mean when your AI model failed?" And it gets, like the industry people are like, well, we don't call it that. I'm like, I'm sure you don't. But like when a Ford Pinto explodes, we know that was a mistake. Like when your model does something bad, that's a mistake. Like own the mistake. And we're too, I think, shy of demanding that of these technology
Mhm.
companies. And there's no reason we shouldn't. Like own your errors if you want us to trust your product.
Yeah, well, I love the relabeling it as errors and failures, and, there th as you're saying that, of course, the book 1984 pops up into my head and the double speak and,
Mhm.
the whole propaganda around that, so it's
Yes.
like, "Okay, you
Yeah.
guys are not giving us a lot of confidence here
Yeah,
if
no,
you're."
it's like very, very mild propaganda with a heavy overlay of marketing rhetoric, right? You see it. I mean, you
Mhm,
can see it develop in real time. And this is where, I mean, when Facebook first entered the social media scene, I'd been studying like MySpace and these earlier companies, and they really leaned into friend. We're going to collect.
mm,
They didn't call people users. I mean, they did internally, but it was friends, friends, gather friends. And I very early on was worried about the use of that term because I'm like,
hmm,
these are online connections. It's not the same. I mean, you are you might have people who are real life friends in this group, but it really degraded the meaning of the term friend.
mm,
And Friendster, for some reason, even though it was called Friendster, it was like
Friendster.
remember Friendster? I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
so old. It's like,
yeah, for a brief moment.
I know it's like, remember the passenger pigeon when it delivered messages? But there are these way look, just like I think, using ChatGPT to create a document can be useful for someone who isn't a writer, who is trying to market something for their company, and they
Mhm,
just wanna kind of summarize. But if you're teaching a child to learn to write, and organize their thoughts, writing is thinking. You're teaching someone how to think, and they have to stare at that blank page and put words to paper. It helps them analyze and think. So I think with these tools, we have to do the same thing. We have to say, well, this is a fundamental skill we need to learn, like how to be a good friend or a good partner to someone. Then let's not outsource that to this technology until we've
mhm.
done it in the real world, in the wild, so to speak.
How do, say, you and I in, like, the normal society who doesn't have billions of dollars to shove this all down our throats, like, how do we, like, combat that? Do you have any thoughts around that? Or
So I would say this is where it is incumbent on people. If you so one, I'll give you an example. I marched into my son's classrooms when they were handed, tablets in elementary school, and I handed them back in, and I said, "Well, we're not doing that in our household. So
Mm,
they will turn in their assignments on paper. You need to print out the worksheet, and they'll do it at home, and they'll turn it in." Well, everyone's doing this. We're tracking this. We're tracking that. And I said, "Well,
tracking it,
yeah." I said,
exactly.
"That's great. You disclose to me who you're sending the tracking information to, what exactly you're tracking." And now my kids were public school kids, so legally they couldn't. I mean, it's different for private school where you kind of opt into a lot of this stuff. So I was just a relentless nag. I was very polite, but I was very insistent. And I always
Mhm,
come back to the teacher and say, I am happy to use this tool, but you need to first prove that it works. You can't just hand this to my kid. And the thing is, I also knew at that point, two of the kids had already gotten around the safety mechanisms of these things. They were just doing God knows what on those
oh
Chromebooks during
gosh.
school. So I think again, so it's a very small example, but you have to stand up and ask questions. If you're a new employee, if you get your first job coming out of college and you go work for like a big institution and they hand you that badge, ask them what it's tracking. You have a
Mm,
right to know. Ask questions because we're too passive about thinking, well, I'll just adapt. Well, we shouldn't have to adapt to some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is invasive of our privacy. Some of this stuff is harmful to children. Some of this stuff really shouldn't be in our hands and used in the way they are. And the people who profit from them, from the information, it's not us. So
mhm.
there is a way in which I think even in a free market society, we should be radically skeptical of new things. And this is where I do sound like a Victorian. Forget being conservative. I'm a Victorian. But each
Remember when heavy metal was gonna rot our
right, well,
brains and
comic books are destroying I have libertarian friends who I adore, and they always like, "You would have been against comic books." And I was like, "Well, I'm against comic books if but the comic books today, the screens, they're reading us. We're not just reading the book, it's reading us in return."
yeah,
So I would say every new thing isn't necessarily an improvement. So if you have good values and you know what your values are, a new tool can help extend those values and help your community flourish. But you have to know, and this is where again, I cite the Amish in the book as
mm,
a for a reason, which is they know what they stand for and what they believe, and they have very rigorous uh, vetting mechanisms for bringing new things in, particularly technological things. But
mhm,
so they don't have zippers, but they will use a phone if it's not in their home. So it's not that they're Luddites and reject technology, and we should all be more like that. We have to be more skeptical, and we have to ask more questions. And as consumers, we should vote with our feet. If a company is giving you something that you think is or collecting too much information, find a different company. If you're really entrepreneurial, start one yourself. I mean, these
mm,
are some of the ways to as individuals to work against it. I obviously think there's a collective action problem when it comes to children. I think there are harms for some of these things that should require we have legislation that should be enforced about age limits for some of these platforms that were designed for adults, not for kids. So
mhm,
that's a whole separate issue of regulation, and there's lots of debate about it. But society does tend to want to protect kids from things that we know to be actively harmful. It's why you don't see a lot of 10-year-olds smoking pack-a-day cigarettes. I mean,
right.
we learn these lessons and then we put boundaries in. And so we need to do more of that with technology while still protecting everybody's right to free speech and individual expression.
Yeah. Well, and I think, to your point about, speak up, question it, don't allow them to just bring the tablets in for everyone just because that's what everyone's doing, sort of falling into that collective illusion of the loudest voice
Hmm.
repeated the most is what people tend to believe, which is unfortunate for us humans, I suppose. But, by questioning it, you're keeping yourself more authentic as well as who you're questioning.
Yes.
Even if you don't, even if you disagree and it's uncomfortable and whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so for whatever that's worth, yeah,
Yeah.
don't just let it steamroll in through your life.
Yeah, you have a right. You have a right as an individual to hold others accountable for what they're doing to you or asking of
Mhm.
you. And yes, it's true. What they'll often hear is, well, then don't use the product. And your response should be, okay, and walk away. Enough people do that, a product fails. Enough
Right.
parents say, no, we're not going to do this with our kids, and that won't work. So again, you're not going to win every battle, but I think when you make choices, especially as an individual, about what do I want to allow in my life? Do I really want to have the last thing I touch at night and the first thing I touch in the morning to be my phone? If you
Mhm.
don't, then change your own behavior and do it in increments. Put your phone downstairs at night and use a real old school alarm clock. Like make weird little decisions based on what you are feeling about your own use of technology, and then talk to your friends and loved ones about it. Be
Yeah.
honest. Because what I've found at least is that I thought everyone would call me a scold, but I have received over 100 beautifully handwritten letters from around the world from people who read the book and said, "I'm also a secret lover of handwritten letters." And so they said me, I mean, it's so heartening. Like there's more
Yeah.
weirdos out there who are skeptical. So like find them and do the right thing together.
Yeah, well, like, by talking about it, or writing about it with your book, you're, in a way, giving people permission.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, "Oh, I can actually do that, and it's not weird and out of the norm," you
Yeah.
know? Which sort of, like, brings me back. I wanted to touch back to your son and his friends putting their phones on the table because that
Mhm.
brought this memory to me, and we can just talk about a little bit kinda where we started about this loss of place and presence
Mhm.
of place, because I was about a month ago, I was in Italy with, Tiffany, my wife. We were celebrating our anniversary and,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. And, we certainly had, times when we were on our phone too, but, we were going to dinner one night in a hotel, and there was these 6 friends, couples, I guess, around a table, and they were just all just glued to the phone. Like, I'm like, "Okay, you go all the way to the Dolomites." They were definitely not Italians. And you're in this beautiful place and you're just like stuck on your phone and you just have no idea what's going on around you or like even the beauty and that, whether it's looking at your phone or, following what everyone else has posted versus having your own unique, authentic experience is just one other way that, these technologies are kind of interrupting even having an authentic life, I guess.
No, that's absolutely right. That's extremely well put because I mean, there are tons of social science studies that prove everything you're saying, but we all know this intuitively.
Mhm,
We
mhm,
remember if we spend an afternoon wandering through a gallery, hopefully with someone you really like, looking at paintings, maybe talking a little bit about it, but never pausing to like snap pictures or be a tourist when you should be a viewer and an appreciator
mhm,
of what you're seeing versus having the kind of tourist experience in life where you're just snapping pictures to prove you were somewhere, thinking, oh, I'll go back and enjoy these memories. But you didn't create the
mhm.
memory if you were too busy mediating your experience. And that's actually how human memory, there's something called the photo impairment effect. If you take a
Hmm.
picture of something, you will be less likely to have a clear memory of that thing because your brain knows you took a picture. And same with like kids in lecture halls and in listening to a lecture. If you take notes by hand, you will retain more than if you just type almost like a transcript on your computer. So we know this, but we don't always know why it works this way. Our brains are still a huge mystery, even to neuroscientists. The best ones will always acknowledge that. So I think those cultivating true awareness, slowing down and paying attention, that's what our phones are constantly trying to tug us to no, no, come over here and play this, Candy Crush or text your friend or go on Instagram. And it's incredibly alluring. And we do have real emotional connection when we do that online. But
Mhm.
those authentic, slower, often inconvenient, sometimes terrible, but genuine experiences that we have in the real world grounded in place, as you say, because we're also losing those sorts of places. If everybody's on their phone, it changes the tenor of a place, whether it's a coffee shop or a museum or just, a public square. If you go and look now, almost no one's aware of anyone else in public space. And so we're not
Mhm.
even giving each other that very basic decency of acknowledgement of other human beings. And I think
Yep.
that detracts from our ability to be a healthy society.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm curious, is there anything else as a parent that especially someone who's very so well versed in all of this that you have tried to guide with your sons, whether they listen to you or not is another question, but like any tips, any suggestions, um, that you've
Sure.
had?
So, I
Yeah.
mean, my sons are now 19. So, I was they had no screen 0 to 5 at all.
Mm,
That was really difficult. Although they're twins and they get along really well, so they always had each other to entertain. I think it's a much bigger challenge when you have kids of different ages and you got to make dinner and you got to entertain one. So I understand that. I would here's a couple things I'd say. Always try to limit screen time and try to put off the screen at the very beginning of their lives for as long as possible. It's not
mm,
always possible, but like don't make it a regular habit of your 2-year-old's life that they spend 30, even an hour a day watching cartoons because the content for kids now is limitless. It's absolutely mesmerizing and it's very difficult to then tell a 2-year-old, "Oh, sit down and let me read you a story." That's going to
or
seem
be creative.
or
Yeah.
be creative, like, so try to preserve that open-ended time. It's so much harder for the parents and caregivers, but it pays dividends later and that they do learn how to entertain themselves and how to
Mm,
kind of do free play. The other thing I would say is they get older, so I didn't give my sons they didn't get a smartphone until they were in high school, right before high school started, and they had to put some
how much
money
of a
on the table.
challenge of that was
Yeah.
for
I mean,
you?
it's tough, but more parents are, like, doing wait until 8th grade, like, try to put
Mm,
the phone off as long as possible and make them put some skin in the game. Mine had to put money down and help pay for their phone policies, so they'd
mhm,
earn some money, and some parents drop contracts and stuff. So that was useful. I had boys, so their interest in social media was not the same as it often is for girls at that age.
mm,
I did allow them at that point. I was like, "Look, I can't stop you from being on social media and doing it, but you know the risks now, and you've seen your friends make terrible mistakes. So, like, try to be smart." They were kind of both on social media off and on. One is now totally off social media on his own choice. Another happily can set it aside. He actually spent 2 months in Wyoming 2 summers ago
Hmm.
doing hiking, and they had a sat phone, but no one had phones. So they are able to choose in a way that I think is harder for kids who become dependent on that technology.
Mhm.
And they become dependent on it because the parents make a real mistake, which is parents fear and need to track their kids and be in touch with them all the time and survey them, the surveillance. Um,
Yeah, I
they
don't
think
know
it's
how we
for
survived our
safety.
childhoods back in the
Yeah.
'70s and '80s.
No, I mean, remember? I mean, all the
Yeah.
crazy stuff we did, totally on track. So kids, that's the other bit of advice, and it's really important for when your kids are out of the house and starting to become young adults, whether they go to college or learn a trade, whatever it is, don't don't use those surveillance tools on them anymore. Even if you're helping
Mhm.
pay for their phone, like, ask them, have that conversation. Because 'cause I've had in the last couple months, I've had, I'd say, a half dozen college students come up to me after a talk and say, "How do I get my parents to take me off of Life 360?" One of the because they're being tracked still, and they
Yeah.
don't like it, but they feel they're very ambivalent about confronting their parents. So don't become like a Stasi parent once your kids are old enough to really have
Mm.
some privacy and freedom. So and free play, just like try to delay it, because once you introduce it, it's incredibly difficult to control it.
Yeah.
That's, I
Yeah.
guess, the
Yeah.
lesson I would say.
Yeah. And then for us older people, it's really, as you said, like, not
All
taking it
about
into the
shaming.
bedroom. It's not shaming.
All about shame. I feel so ashamed. I'm on the phone.
Oh my gosh.
No, but try to practice. Look, do that experiment. For 24 hours,
Mhm.
try not to pick up your phone in those interstitial moments. See if you can
Yeah.
get through a day. And,
Yeah.
like,
And
take a book of poetry with you or just look around or let your mind wander.
mhm. Yeah, and it wa to get back to the Italy trip, I think actually reading your book during while I was there was a huge help and just reminder to, like, okay, I'm not gonna take out my phone right now to, like, take a picture of that. I'm just gonna, like, really watch what's going on here and really take it all in, and I think I have no doubt it made for a deeper, more meaningful trip. I mean, not that I didn't use my phone, I did, but it was
But you used it
greatly.
thoughtfully with
Yeah.
awareness. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think, kinda getting back to where we started is, one other thing is just getting outside and getting your kids outside so they can connect to nature and connect to the world around them in that way without phones and, you know, see where that takes them in their creativity.
Yes, absolutely. Free range
Yeah.
kid.
Free range kid, I love that term. Yeah. Yeah, we need more of those for sure. Anything else you'd like to add that we haven't hit on about your book or well, your book is coming out in paperback
Yes.
today, which
Yes.
is we're recording it today, it probably won't come out for a couple weeks, but
Yes.
today, congratulations in
Thank you.
paperback. So it'll make a great holiday gift, maybe for anyone who's a little too consumed by technology and anyone else concerned about it.
I'll tell you a funny story is that it came out in the UK in January, and I went over there in the spring to do some book events, and one woman came up to the table with 5 copies of the book, so I was like, "Well, yes, I will do whatever you ask. Look at all those books." But she had me make each book out to a different member of her large family, and I had
Mm.
to inscribe it, "Put your damn phone down." I was like, "You're the boss. You paid." So she gave one to each family member. I was like,
Oh,
"Ooh, that's
that's
harsh,"
brilliant.
but
Oh, if you're listening out there, I would love to hear how that went for you.
yes,
Thanks for
exactly. No,
that.
she seemed certain it was necessary, so I was like, "Are you sure I could just say,
Yeah,
look up more?" Or
yeah. Well, I highly recommend your book, The Extinction of Experience. Thank you again for taking time to talk to us today and share all your research and knowledge. Important stuff in this world we live in today and where it seems to be going. So speak up, be authentic. And again, thank you for being on.
Thanks, Scott. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And a big thanks to all of you out there who chose to spend your time listening to this episode. I really want to grow this community together. You can help in a couple small, quick ways to do that. You can click that follow button, you can leave a comment down below, and most importantly, if this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend or friends or family members who you think might also want to hear it. Together, hopefully, we can make this world just a little better place.